What was your, lack of a subtitle, assistant to the president, and what?
I actually didn't have an and,
Oh.
as far as I can remember. I think I just was an assistant to the president.
All right.
Yes.
Your duties while you were an SGE, what were those duties?
To help advise the White House on communications, strategy, press strategy during those early days of the administration.
So when you returned as an assistant to the president, it was a different title, but is it fair to say that it was a similar role as when you had been an SGE?
I took on more managerial responsibilities when I returned in May of 2022.
And then you served from May of 2022 until after President Biden withdrew from the 2024 race, and you left at around July or August, is that right?
I left August 6th.
August 6th.
Yes.
A year ago yesterday. And you joined Future Forward, the main PAC supporting the Harris campaign at that point, is that right?
That's correct.
What was your role on the Future Forward PAC?
It was primarily to raise money and work on the political coordinated side because my 90-day cooling off period, which would have allowed me to work on the independent side, wasn't 90 days from when I left. It was going to take me into November. So I was on the political coordinated side.
And forgive me for going out of order here, but for President Biden's 2024 campaign, you were a White House employee. You didn't have any paid role on the campaign? Or
No, I was a White House employee.
and are you currently employed by Future Forward?
I consult for Future Forward, yes.
And so you work at the same firm we've been discussing?
No, I did not return to my firm.
Okay. So you would advise or consult for Future Forward independently, is that fair?
That's correct.
I have one more campaign structure question. Is
Yes.
it common to have contingency bonuses based off the outcome of the election?
That is not uncommon in campaigns,
Thank you.
at least in my experience.
I did say I would do this. We're going to go back into each of the positions that you had working for President Biden or candidate Biden. So in the 2020 presidential campaign, what were your responsibilities on that campaign?
In 2019, again, I was a consultant who was primarily in an advisory capacity, helping mostly in the communications, press, research area. Broader campaign strategy was driven by others. I would say that as the year went on, I became more and more involved with the campaign, and that in early 2020, I cannot remember exactly when, somewhere between the Iowa caucus, I can't remember exactly when, then candidate Biden asked me to take on a larger role in terms of overall campaign management, which I did. And then after he had, locked up the nomination in, realistically speaking, in March of 2020, I returned to a different role, which was to be in charge of the convention, to obviously continue working with the communications and press operations, and to work, to be one of the liaisons with the transition operation.
Who did you report to in this role?
I reported to our campaign manager, Jennifer O'Malley Dillon, and to the candidate.
And you said a little bit earlier, you discussed your frequency of interaction with then candidate Biden. Is it fair to say that it did decrease with the onset of COVID-19? Is that right?
As I remember, having had a fairly intense period of engagement. Once COVID hit and everybody went home, I had most of my interactions with Biden at that point became part of meetings and with structure.
When you say meetings,
I didn't travel with him or anything.
when you say meetings, do you mean in-person meetings or virtual meetings or both?
Virtual meetings.
And so prior to COVID, you had, I think you said deep interactions or frequent interactions with then candidate Biden. Is that fair?
During the 6 weeks that I was, running the campaign, for all intents and purposes, fairly frequent interactions with him.
Fairly frequent. During that time, how would you say then candidate Biden's communication skills were?
His performance as a candidate, when his back was against the wall, was a very good performance. He was very focused. He knew what he had to do. He went and executed extremely well.
And again, and I know we discussed that at some point you became aware that President Biden had grown up struggling with a stutter. Is this when you found that out, when you were working on the 2020 campaign, or was it later?
No, I learned it working on the 2020 campaign. There was a large piece in, I believe, The Atlantic. To the best of my recollection, it was in The Atlantic by an author who also had a stutter and who had written about Biden and had interviewed him, I guess. It was a very long, very moving piece. But I also, had also learned about it, I think, from another staff member before that.
So you never, and I understand that you said that you didn't frequently interact with Senator Biden in the 1980s and 1990s, but you had interacted with him much more than the average American over the course of his various positions. Is that fair?
I think it would be fair to characterize my interactions with him as limited when he was vice president. And then once he became a candidate for president in 2020, more regularly.
And so you had these multiple interactions with Biden over the years, and then many interactions while he was a candidate, and you never noticed that he had a stutter until you read it in the media. Is that right?
That is correct, yes. Mm-hmm.
When did you first personally observe President Biden stutter?
I don't remember, okay? And, it's likely he stuttered and I just didn't notice it because I wasn't looking for it. But I do not remember.
Were you eventually involved in discussions over which staffers would get which jobs in the eventual Biden White House?
I was involved in, to the best of my recollection, I was involved primarily around the areas where I had most responsibility in the campaign and where I knew the personnel the best, so press communications. Research.
Thank you. Do you recall specific people that you had a direct role in hiring?
Well, the president hired people. I did not have a direct role.
In advising the president to hire?
Because I spent a good chunk of the transition not planning to go into the White House, I was not as involved in discussions around the White House staff as I would have been if I had been planning to go into the White House from day one. So many of those decisions were made without my input.
During the 2020 campaign, did you or anyone else take steps to conceal then candidate Biden's cognitive decline or signs of his aging?
Well, I'd like to take issue with the cognitive decline piece of this. We did not see cognitive decline. I did not see it. I did not experience that. I had a candidate who had won an improbable primary victory and then won the presidency in 2020.
So you don't feel as though you concealed then candidate Biden from the press or the media or otherwise?
The candidate debated in the primaries, don't recall the exact number of times, but something, maybe 9 or 10 times for the Democratic Party to see. He debated twice in the general election. He did interviews. Obviously, COVID limited the amount of time he could be out there campaigning, but the candidate was out there for people to see.
I'm gonna phrase it a similar way, and Suzanne can get mad at me again. Did President Biden win both 2020 debates against President Trump?
In my opinion, and from what I observed, yes. And I will say that politically, we felt the debates were very beneficial to the Biden candidacy in 2020.
And just for clarity, in defining win, you spent a lot of time with dial groups in real time, you spent a lot of time with polling after the fact. Is that how you would define win, that the dial groups showed that the president did a good job or they were appreciating his message?
I think what our research showed was that he had strengthened his position.
Did you have a role in preparing presidential candidate Biden for during the 2020 campaign for his debates?
His primary debates?
Any debate?
Yes.
So the primary debates only?
No, I was also involved in the general election debates.
Do you recall President Biden's, then candidate Biden's performance during those debate preps?
I only recall a couple specifically. I certainly recall generally. He would, the debates during the primaries were very different from a general election debate. They started off with huge stages of candidates. There were 10 candidates on the stage. So they weren't really classic debates, and you prepared people differently, so.
Did you see any change in President Biden, then candidate Biden's abilities from when you had prepared him while he was running to be vice president in 2008 to 2012 for his debates?
That's a hard question for me to answer because his debates in 2008 and 2012 were against Republican opponents and they were one-on-one. The primary debates we were preparing him for were more like forums. They were multi-candidate and they were against Democrats. So that's a very different dynamic to begin with.
Sure.
So in terms of change from 2008 and 2012, it's a hard one for me to judge.
I can appreciate that the format was...
It's apples and oranges.
I can appreciate that the format was different, but in terms of his style or communication abilities or his delivery or forgetting the substance of an answer or anything of that sort of genre, did anything change regarding that from 2008, 2012, going to 2020?
Again, to the best of my recollection, I think it was pretty much the same. Some of the primary debates were better than others.